this first lesson, we'll be covering the major scale. Now, the reason why we are starting with the major scale is because most of the things we'll be learning comes from the major scale. So the way we name chords, the number system, chord extensions. And I know a lot of you are sample makers and you like the dark sound of the minor scale, but trust me, even the minor scale itself comes from the major scale. But for now, if you're not familiar with how the major scale sounds, then here it is. And before we get into how we build a major scale, let's just look at one of the things that we can get out of the major scale itself. And that is the triad, the major triad to be specific. Now, if you're like me, when you started learning music production or even music theory, you're probably taught to build chords like this. So, place a note in the scale, skip the next one, place another note, skip the next one in the scale, by the way, and then place the next one. And it sounds like this. This is a C major triad. And they probably said that if you wanted to build more complex or lush chords, you keep skipping the notes. So you have G, you skip A, and then go to B. And then we get something like this. Why is there so much noise outside? We're gonna call this method the skip note method. And let's find out exactly what is happening behind this method. So the first note that we have in the chord is C. And it's known as the root, and that kind of makes sense because when you hear the word root, you think of a tree and the root is usually at the bottom, so it makes sense. So we're gonna add R next to it for root. After the root, we have the third. Now, just like me when I was starting out, you're probably asking yourself, why do we call this the third if it's the second notes of our chord? Because we have 1, 2, 3. As you can see in the back, we have a scale highlight. I'm gonna write 1 on the roots because the first note, and then 2 that we skipped, and then we land on 3. So that is the third. And then we can even keep going. We have 4, which is F right there, and then 5, which is G. The reason why we call this the third, this note right here, is because we are relating it to the major scale in the back. And as you can see, it is the third note in the major scale. And of course, this one, we're obviously going to call it the fifth. Now, there is a little bit more to this, but for now, we're going to keep it simple so that we just understand how we can get different things out of the major scale. Now, the next question that you might be having is, how do we build a major scale? Well, I'm going to show you various ways, and we're going to start with the easiest way. If you're on FL, you want to go to the stem feature, and then go to melodic right there, and then you have major, the one that has Ionian. You want to place it on any starting point that you want. So this is a C major scale. This is a D major scale now. Another way to do it is to just use all the white notes starting from C to C in the next octave. So we're going to have C, and then we go to D, and then E, F, G, A, B, then back to C. So now we have a C major scale. And then you can transpose it to other points to get different scales that you would like to get. Now, these are all cool because they're easy, but I do recommend the next method because it's probably the most important method for the long term. So the formula we're going to be using is made up of whole steps and half steps. A half step is simply the smallest distance we can get on our piano roll. And it sounds something like this. And as you can see, it's the smallest distance because when I go down, we are back to C. And a whole step is simply 2 half steps. Think of it as kind of like a fruit. When you cut it in half, we have half of it and half of it. When you put it together, we get a whole. So from C to C sharp, we have a half step. And then when we go up another semitone or another half step, we get a whole step or a whole tone. And as you can hear, we're already getting some of the major scale. That pattern of whole steps and half steps goes something like this. We have root or C, whole step into D, another whole step into E. Now we have the half step into F, whole step into G, whole step into A, another whole step into B, and then finally a half step back to C. So now it sounds like this. We can apply this formula on any other starting point and it's still gonna give us a major scale. Let's do A major. So we have A, we take a whole step into B, another whole step but into C sharp, and then half step, whole step, whole step, another whole step, and then back to A with the half step here. And again, it sounds like this. And if you feel like this is a little confusing, then what I recommend, which is by the way the best tool, is to just use your ear, because it's really hard to miss the major scale. Let me just try switching up a couple of notes and let's see if it still sounds like a major scale. Now it sounds a little exotic and it still sounds good. Don't get me wrong, you can still go out of the key and we're going to cover ways to do that. But the major scale itself has its specific feeling, it has its specific sound to it. To avoid confusion, think of this process as kind of like walking. When you're walking, you don't count the steps before you start moving. And by the way, I got this analogy from Piano Lesson with Warren. The way he explains it is like when you're walking, you're standing still. So in this case, we are standing still but on C, because it's our starting point. We haven't started moving. And then when you take a step, that's when you count 1. So we have standing point and then 1 step into D, another whole step into E, and then after that we have a half step into F, and then keep going like that. So C in this case is kind of like the 0 point. It's like 0 because we haven't moved yet, and then 1 step into D. So I hope that clears out any confusion that you might have. And as practice or homework, what you can do is try singing different major scales depending on what range is comfortable for you. And then from there, what you can do is start building different major scales from different starting points. If you have an instrument, try practicing just the linear major scale. And this is mainly to get the sound of the major scale really ingrained in you. I think that's it. And I'll catch you in the next lesson. To avoid confusion, because when I started out, I was counting. I start on C and C, whole step, whole step, whole step. But then the whole step itself is the distance, not the note.